Want to know why? Ask how, Howard, the humongous! Let's do a little riff on global warming. A little riff that could get me thrown out of science forever and lose me the 3 people we have left who are still watching Howard the Humongous. I can't tell you whether global warming is for real or not. That is well beyond my area of expertise. But I can tell you one thing that makes me extremely leery. I'm watching a tremendous amount of conformity-enforcing pressure being put on people in the scientific and academic community to repeat one and only one party line. Global warming is real, and global warming is going to kill us off. Now, that may be true, but when you have pressure to only repeat one point of view, you are very unlikely to arrive at truth. First of all, let's look at the truth-defining mechanism of science. It depends on competition. It depends on the competition of many points of view. And it especially depends on something few scientists seem to know anything about these days, and probably never really have. And that is the obligation of a dedicated few to be total heretics, to go way outside the boundaries, and to say things that other scientists find utterly disreputable. For example, in the days of Ptolemy was a guy in Alexandria in approximately 100 AD. If my arithmetic is at all correct, about 1900 years ago, who was freaking brilliant. And Ptolemy managed to come up with a system that explained why the stars and planets, not to mention the sun and the moon, move in the heavens the way they do. They move in the heavens the way they do because they are on crystalline spheres, these big glass balls. And these big glass balls surround the Earth, and they're concentric. One is nested inside of another. And on one great big glass ball, the sun revolves around the Earth. On another great big glass ball, the moon revolves around the Earth. On another great big glass ball, the fixed stars, way on the outside of all the other balls, revolve around the Earth. And then there are a variety of glass balls for the various planets. Ptolemy's system was brilliantly effective. Yes, there were problems, but there are problems in every scientific explanatory system. And Ptolemy's followers were able to work out the reasons for most of these problems. The reasons were called epicycles. Sometimes planets didn't work the way they should according to Ptolemy's rules, and that was because sometimes the spheres did strange and wobbly things, but Ptolemy's guys were able to figure out what those things were and describe them. So for 1400 years, from 100 AD to 1600 AD, saying something other than Ptolemy's system, everybody knew you were insane. Everybody knew that to be an educated human, you had to understand Ptolemy's systems. And if somebody brought up an objection, like, why does this planet go in this particular wiggly way that doesn't seem to be described by Ptolemy's system, you looked at him and said, get an education. Don't you understand epicycles? Until you've studied epicycles, you don't understand your science. You're not a legitimate scientist. So when Copernicus, in the late 1500s, came up with an idea that, maybe the sun didn't revolve around the Earth. Maybe the Earth revolved around the sun. He was so afraid of punishment from his peers, from legitimate scientists, from educated thinkers, that he didn't dare publish
his book on the subject. The book was not published until he died. When Galileo thought that what Copernicus had said made sense and made a case for it in a book in which he had two characters, one of whom argued on behalf of Ptolemy's system, the sun revolving around the earth, the other one who argued on behalf of Copernicus' system, the earth revolving around the sun. In other words, the book seemed like a more or less even-handed debate, even if it was written by a guy who'd already made up his mind, and jiggered the system. Nonetheless, his book was originally accepted. It was accepted so much that when the church sent off priests to try to convert the Chinese, they took Galileo's system and his books with them and preached them to the Chinese. Meanwhile, the Pope changed his mind. The Pope decided to get across church doctrines, we got to stick with this idea that the sun revolves around the earth. We don't have room for this other point of view, that the earth revolves around the sun. So the Pope, terrified poor Galileo, and there was a guy named Giordano Bruno who made a claim that you and I would consider totally scientifically acceptable. He'd said, all of those balls up there in the sky, those little pinpricks of light, you and I can clearly see that they are not worlds, they're little tiny pinpricks of light. Giordano Bruno was crazy enough to say, there are other worlds and they might have people on them. They're worlds like ours. Do you know what they did, Giordano Bruno? They took him to the Plaza de Fiores, the Plaza of Flowers. They put a leather gag in his mouth so that he couldn't preach to the crowds. They put him on a big pile of wood, and they burned him to death. Galileo did not want that to happen to him. He cut a deal with the Pope. He swore up and down, signed a bunch of papers saying everything he'd ever written about the earth revolving around the sun was wrong. And he held to that position to get 10 years of house arrest so he wouldn't go to the stake. In other words, tremendous pressures can be placed on you by incredibly well-educated people who know their science to keep your mouth shut about alternative points of view. And right now, those pressures are being leveled against people who have questions about climate change. Again, this is not an episode about whether climate change exists or not. I do not know. Yes, I can tell you that there have been times in the history of this planet when the carbon dioxide level has been 200 times what it is today. Yes, I can remind you of something you already know. There have been ice ages and global warmings beyond belief. And all of these have happened without smokestacks. All of them have happened without tailpipes. This is a planet of climate change. Those things I know. But I've been told in no uncertain terms, I should not tell you those things. That to tell you those things is irresponsible. In other words, the pressure is on, just like it was in the days when Ptolemy, for 1,500 years, told everybody in sight that the sun revolves around the earth. And that pressure can lead us to ignorance, not science, ignorance.
This is about critical thinking. In science, those of us who believe that they believe in science call themselves rational and call other people irrational. But many of those who believe they believe in science don't really know what science is about. Science is about questioning things. Science is about regarding everything we think we know as provisional. Science is about looking for the things we take for granted every day and skip over as if they're pavements, as if there are stones in the pavements we walk on, and examining them and wondering about them. Science is not about dogma. Science is not about learning there is only one way to think about something. Learning that there's only one way to think about something is anti-science. In fact, it's religion, it's faith, it's belief. And periodically in science, we have groups of dogmatists. We have groups who believe in a faith and present it as being science. And like St. Augustine, who had been a tremendous heretic during most of his life, and then switched over to the church and started hunting for heretics and doing the worst imaginable things to destroy them, there are people in science who are science bullies. Their entire job seems to be to maintain one line of thought, and that only that line of thought is valid, and to attack every other line of thought that could threaten it. And you see that in particular in the global warming debate. Global warming may be happening. I'm not in a position to know. But what I have seen is that within the scientific community, if you disagree with the idea that man is causing global warming and that we have to shut down man-made activities, technologies, in order to stop global warming, if you disagree with that line of thought, you are a heretic. You are beneath contempt. You are unscientific. There is only one valid scientific belief as far as the heretic hunters, the science bullies, the global warming bullies are concerned. Man is causing global warming and every SUV must go immediately. Guess what, boys and girls? That isn't science. An approach that says that only one line of thought is valid is religion. Science is about saying every line of thought is open for questioning. Last night I was having this debate with a next-door neighbor I absolutely adore. He's a wonderful guy. He owns a huge bookstore in Seattle. What he's doing living here in Park Slope, Brooklyn, when he owns a huge bookstore in Seattle, is beyond me. Nonetheless, he's a great human being. But when we got onto the subject of global warming, and I talked about the necessity for skepticism, the necessity to look at this very carefully and very critically, I was afraid I was going to lose his friendship forever, period, which would be a huge, huge loss to me. Then this morning, going through, there are two major journals in science. They tower above all others. They are Nature, which comes out of England, and Science, which comes out of the United States. And this morning in Science, I ran across the following, and I'm going to give it to you as a quote. The annual mean global temperature has not risen in the 21st century. We haven't had global warming in the 13 years of the 21st century. And to go back to the quote, this challenges the prevailing view that anthropogenic forcing causes climate warming. A major study published in one of the two leading journals in science says, hey, these predictions about global warming haven't worked out for the last 13 years. And it may be that the entire notion that man is causing global warming, in a world, by the way, that's been dominated by ice ages until the last 10,000 years, that's even had a snowball and a slush ball Earth, those views may not be true. Well, guess what? The idea that something may not be true and should be continually questioned, that's science. This is Howard the Humongous, speaking to you from the future, that it is your job to make.